There comes a quiet moment in every life when the fog begins to lift, when the words that once confused you, the smiles that once disarmed you, and the guilt that once controlled you all start to lose their power. You begin to notice the patterns, the pauses, the way your spirit was gently bent to fit someone else's will. And in that moment, something sacred awakens within you. Not anger, not bitterness, but clarity. A steady, unshakable knowing that you were never meant to be handled, shaped, or diminished. You were meant to stand whole and aware in the truth of your own worth. And once you learn this, truly learn it, no hand can pull your strings again, and no voice can make you doubt the power that has always lived inside you. There is a kind of awakening that does not arrive with noise or applause. It comes quietly, like morning light slipping through a window you forgot to close. One day you begin to see not just what is said, but what is meant, not just what is done, but what is intended. The confusion that once clouded your thoughts begins to settle, and in its place rises a calm, steady understanding. You start to recognize the patterns that once passed as coincidence, the words that once felt like truth but now reveal themselves as carefully chosen tools. And in that seeing, something shifts inside you. You are no longer standing in the same place, even if your surroundings have not changed. Awareness has a way of restoring what was quietly taken from you. It gives language to the unease you once ignored and shape to the instincts you were taught to doubt. You realize that the discomfort you felt was never a weakness. It was wisdom trying to speak. And now that you are listening, truly listening, you begin to trust yourself again. That trust becomes a shield, not hard and unfeeling, but firm and unshakable. It allows you to pause where you once rushed, to question where you once accepted, and to stand still where you once felt pushed. There was a time when control did not look like control. It looked like persuasion, like concern, like love wrapped in conditions. It asked you to bend just a little, to give just a little more, until you could no longer recognize where you ended and someone else began. But clarity redraws those lines. It reminds you that you are allowed to exist without being explained, to choose without being persuaded, to feel without being corrected. And once you understand this, the hold that once seemed so strong begins to loosen, not because they have changed, but because you have. What once pulled at you now passes by without anchoring itself. The same words may be spoken, the same tactics may appear, but they no longer find a home in you. You see them for what they are, reflections of another's need to control, not measures of your worth. And in that realization, you reclaim something powerful, your response. You are no longer reacting from habit or fear, you are responding from awareness. And that difference, though invisible to the eye, changes everything. There is no struggle in this kind of freedom, no need to prove or to fight. When you see clearly, you simply step out of what no longer serves you. You do not argue with illusions once you recognize them as such. You do not chase validation from those who benefit from your uncertainty. Instead, you stand rooted in a quiet certainty that does not need permission to exist. And it is here, in this grounded and awakened space, that control loses its grip entirely. Not because it disappeared, but because it no longer has access to you. Doubt has a quiet way of slipping into your thoughts, not as a stranger, but as a familiar voice that sounds almost like your own. It asks small questions at first, gentle, persistent, and convincing. Are you sure? Maybe you're overthinking. Maybe you misunderstood. And before long, what began as a whisper becomes a weight you carry into every decision, every conversation, every moment where your truth tries to rise. This is the space where manipulation finds its footing, not in your weakness, but in your hesitation. Because when you begin to question yourself, you unknowingly hand over the authority that was always meant to be yours. There was never anything accidental about that doubt. It was nurtured, shaped, and reinforced over time through subtle contradictions, through moments where your reality was quietly dismissed, through situations that left you feeling just uncertain enough to seek reassurance outside yourself. And the more you searched for that reassurance, the easier it became for someone else to define what was real, what was acceptable, and what was too much. But there comes a moment when you begin to notice the pattern, when you realize that the confusion you feel is not a flaw within you, but a result of being pulled away from your own center. Self-trust begins as a small act, almost unnoticeable at first. It is the decision to pause instead of immediately agreeing. It is the choice to sit with your feelings instead of dismissing them. It is the quiet acknowledgement that what you feel deserves your attention, even if no one else validates it. And as you continue to honor these moments, something begins to grow. A steady confidence that does not need to be loud to be powerful. It is not built on proving others wrong, but on finally believing yourself. When you trust yourself, manipulation loses its entry point. The words that once made you second guess now meet a grounded mind that listens but does not absorb blindly. You begin to recognize when something feels off, and instead of explaining it away, you respect it. That respect becomes a boundary, not harsh or defensive, but clear and unwavering. You no longer feel the need to argue your reality into existence because you understand that truth does not require approval to stand. There is a quiet strength in this kind of confidence. It does not seek attention, and it does not demand agreement. It simply exists, steady and present, shaping the way you move through the world. And those who once relied on your doubt begin to feel the shift, not because you have changed who you are, but because you have returned to yourself. The space they once occupied, filled with uncertainty and second guessing, is no longer available to them. In the end, self-trust is not just protection, it is liberation. It frees you from the exhausting cycle of seeking, questioning, and adjusting yourself to fit someone else's version of truth. It reminds you that you are allowed to stand firm in what you know, even when it is inconvenient for others. And once that trust takes root deeply and honestly, there is nothing left for manipulation to hold on to. It fades not with resistance, but with absence, because where self-trust lives, doubt no longer survives. There was a time when you were told, in ways both subtle and direct, that you felt too much, that your reactions were too strong, your concerns too heavy, your heart too open. And after hearing it often enough, you began to believe it. You started to shrink your responses, to question your feelings before you even understood them, to apologize for emotions that were never wrong to begin with. But what if that label, too sensitive, was never a truth, only a convenient story? A story that made it easier for someone else to move freely without being questioned, without being held accountable, without being seen too clearly. What you were experiencing was not excess, it was awareness. Your emotions were responding exactly as they were meant to, alerting you to what felt misaligned, what felt dismissive, what felt unsafe. But instead of being encouraged to listen to those signals, you were taught to override them. Each time your feelings were minimized or redirected, you learned to turn away from yourself and lean towards someone else's version of reality. And over time, that conditioning became so familiar that it felt like truth. Yet emotions are not flaws that need correction. They are messages waiting to be understood. They rise from a place deeper than logic, carrying information that words often cannot fully explain. When something feels off, there is a reason, even if you cannot immediately name it. And when something hurts, it is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that something meaningful within you has been touched. To dismiss these responses is to silence a part of yourself that was designed to protect and guide you. Reclaiming your emotions begins with a simple, powerful shift. You stop asking whether your feelings are valid, and you start asking what they are trying to tell you. You allow yourself to feel without rushing to justify or suppress. You sit with the discomfort long enough to understand its source, rather than pushing it away to keep the peace. And in doing so, you begin to rebuild a relationship with yourself that is rooted in respect instead of doubt. As this awareness grows, so does your clarity. You start to recognize when your feelings are being challenged, not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient for someone else. You notice the difference between someone seeking understanding and someone seeking control. And instead of adjusting your emotional truth to fit their comfort, you hold steady in what you feel. Not loudly, not defensively, but with a quiet certainty that does not waver under pressure. There is strength in allowing yourself to feel fully without shame or apology. It does not make you fragile, it makes you aware. It does not make you difficult, it makes you honest. And honesty, when rooted in self-awareness, becomes something unshakable. Because once you understand that your emotions are signals, not shortcomings, you stop betraying yourself to maintain harmony that was never real. In that realization, something powerful takes place. The voice that once told you to silence yourself grows quieter, and in its place rises a deeper, steadier knowing. You begin to trust that what you feel has meaning, that your inner world is not something to be managed by others, but something to be honored by you. And from that place, manipulation finds no ground to stand on, because you are no longer disconnected from the very compass it once tried to take from you. Guilt has a way of arriving dressed as responsibility. It whispers that you should have done more, said less, given deeper, stayed longer. It convinces you that your worth is measured by how much you carry for others, even when the weight begins to bend your spirit. And so you learn to say yes when your heart says no, to show up when you are already exhausted, to offer pieces of yourself in places where they are not honored. Over time, guilt stops feeling like an emotion and starts feeling like a duty, an unspoken rule that keeps you tied to expectations that were never truly yours. But there is a difference between genuine accountability and manufactured guilt. One calls you to grow, to reflect, to make things right when you have caused harm. The other keeps you small, keeps you compliant, keeps you questioning your right to choose yourself. It does not ask for understanding. It demands obedience. And often it is reinforced by those who benefit from your constant giving, from your inability to step back, from your habit of placing their comfort above your own well-being. You may have been taught that saying no is selfish, that choosing yourself is an act of betrayal, that peace must be earned through sacrifice. And so guilt becomes the language you speak without thinking, the reflex that rises whenever you consider doing something for your own sake. Even in moments of rest, it lingers, quietly reminding you of what you could be doing for someone else, how you could be more, give more, be more accommodating. It does not shout, it persuades. And that persuasion can feel so familiar that it becomes difficult to recognize it as control. Breaking away from this pattern does not happen all at once. It begins in small, deliberate choices. The first time you say no without a long explanation. The first time you prioritize your time without apologizing for it. The first time you allow someone to sit with their disappointment instead of rushing to fix it. These moments may feel uncomfortable at first, even heavy, because you are stepping outside a pattern that once defined your relationships. But discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is often a sign that you are doing something new. As you continue, something begins to shift. The guilt that once felt overwhelming starts to lose its authority. You begin to question it instead of obeying it. You ask yourself whether the responsibility you feel is truly yours to carry, or if it has simply been placed upon you over time. And in that questioning, you create space, space to choose, space to breathe, space to exist without constant obligation. There is a quiet freedom in no longer responding automatically to guilt. You start to understand that your value is not tied to how much you sacrifice, and your kindness does not have to come at the expense of your peace. You can still care deeply, still show up with compassion, still offer support, but from a place of willingness, not pressure, from a place of clarity, not fear. And as this understanding takes root, the hold that guilt once had over you begins to dissolve. Not because you have become indifferent, but because you have become aware. You recognize when guilt is being used as a tool rather than a truth. You feel it, but you do not follow it blindly. You acknowledge it, but you do not let it decide for you. In that space, something steady and grounded begins to grow. You move with intention instead of obligation. You give when it feels right, not when it is demanded. And most importantly, you begin to understand that your peace is not something you have to trade in order to be worthy of connection. It is something you are allowed to keep. There was a time when an apology, no matter how small or rehearsed, felt like a doorway you were expected to open. You heard the words, "I'm sorry," and something in you softened immediately, as if forgiveness was not a choice, but a responsibility. You were taught that holding on meant bitterness, that letting go meant maturity, and that granting access again was proof of your goodness. So you opened the door again and again, even when the same patterns walked back in wearing different words. But not every apology carries truth within it. Some arrive too quickly, before understanding has taken root. Some are shaped more by the desire to restore comfort than to repair harm. And some are offered not as a bridge to change, but as a key to regain entry into spaces they once disrupted. When you begin to see this clearly, forgiveness stops being automatic. It becomes intentional. It becomes something you offer with awareness, not something you surrender out of habit. There is a difference between someone who is sorry for what they did and someone who is sorry they can no longer do it without consequence. That difference reveals itself not in words, but in consistency, in the patience to rebuild trust without rushing you, in the humility to accept that an apology does not erase impact, in the willingness to change even when no one is watching. And when those elements are absent, the apology, no matter how polished, remains incomplete. You are allowed to accept an apology without reopening the same door. You are allowed to release resentment without reestablishing closeness. These are not contradictions. They are boundaries shaped by clarity. Forgiveness is something you can hold within yourself, a quiet act that frees you from carrying what hurt you. But access, that is something earned, something rebuilt over time, something that must align with your sense of safety and respect. There may be moments when this choice feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, when you question whether you are being too distant, too firm, too unwilling. But what you are truly doing is honoring the lesson that experience has already taught you. You are recognizing that your energy is not an open invitation, and your presence is not something that must be continually negotiated at the cost of your peace. Discernment grows in these moments. It asks you to look beyond what is said and to observe what is sustained. It reminds you that trust is not restored through promises alone, but through patterns that prove themselves over time. And it gives you permission to step back, to take the time you need, to decide what feels right without being rushed by expectation or pressure. There is strength in knowing that you can be compassionate without being accessible, that you can wish someone well without welcoming them back into the same space they once unsettled, that you can move forward without reopening what has already shown you its nature. This is not about punishment, it is about alignment. It is about choosing what reflects the respect you now hold for yourself. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from trying to explain yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. You search for the right words, the perfect tone, the clearest example, believing that if you just say it well enough, they will finally see you as you are. But the truth is, some people are not confused about your worth. They are invested in you questioning it, because as long as you remain in that space of proving and explaining, you are easier to shape, easier to manage, easier to keep within the limits they have set for you. You were never meant to live your life as an argument waiting to be won. Your value does not increase with explanation, and it does not decrease with misunderstanding. It exists, steady and whole, whether it is recognized or not. But when you begin to doubt that, you step into a cycle that has no end, constantly adjusting, constantly clarifying, constantly trying to earn a place that was already yours by simply being. There is a difference between being open to healthy communication and feeling obligated to justify your existence. One builds connection, the other drains it. When someone genuinely seeks to understand you, there is space, patience, and respect in the conversation. But when someone benefits from your doubt, no explanation will ever be enough. The goal is not clarity, it is control. And the more you try to prove your worth in that space, the further you move away from your own center. At some point, you begin to notice how much energy is spent on being misread, misjudged, or deliberately misunderstood. You begin to feel the weight of conversations that go in circles where your truth is not received but redirected. And in that awareness, a choice begins to form, not loud or dramatic, but firm and steady. The choice to stop over-explaining. The choice to let your actions speak where your words have been dismissed. The choice to walk away from spaces that require you to shrink in order to be accepted. This is not about becoming distant or closed off. It is about becoming rooted. It is about understanding that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected, and not every opinion needs to be challenged. Some things reveal themselves over time, and some people reveal themselves in how they respond to your silence. When you stop explaining, you create space to observe, and what you see in that space often tells you more than any conversation ever could. There is a quiet confidence that grows when you no longer feel the need to defend your worth. It does not seek approval, and it does not chase validation. It simply stands, grounded in a truth that does not waver based on who agrees or disagrees. And from that place, your presence changes. You speak when it matters, not when it is demanded. You engage where there is mutual respect, not where there is constant resistance. You begin to understand that your time, your energy, your voice, these are not things to be spent proving something that is already true. They are things to be invested where they are valued, where they are met with understanding, where they are allowed to exist without constant negotiation. And as you shift in this way, the dynamic around you begins to shift as well. Those who relied on your need to explain find less to hold on to because you are no longer offering it. In the end, your worth is not a conversation to be debated. It is a reality to be lived. And once you fully step into that understanding, you stop asking for recognition from those who cannot offer it. Not out of pride, but out of clarity. Because you finally see that the moment you stop explaining your value is the moment you start protecting it. And as you continue to honor that choice, something becomes clear. Your peace is not dependent on who apologizes, who returns, or who changes. It is grounded in your ability to see, to understand, and to decide with intention. And once you reach that place, apologies no longer hold power over you. They are simply words, met with awareness, measured by truth, and accepted only when they align with the life you are no longer willing to compromise. There comes a moment when staying begins to cost you more than leaving ever could. It is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is a quiet knowing that settles in your chest, a gentle but persistent truth that whispers, "This is no longer where you belong." And yet, walking away can feel like a betrayal of everything you were taught to value: loyalty, patience, endurance. You tell yourself to hold on a little longer, to try a little harder, to be a little more understanding. But clarity does not grow in spaces where you are constantly asked to ignore yourself. Distance, in its truest form, is not an act of rejection. It is an act of recognition. It is the moment you understand that not every connection is meant to be maintained at the same closeness, and not every relationship is meant to continue in the same way. You begin to see that stepping back is not about punishing someone else. It is about honoring what you have come to know within yourself. It is about choosing alignment over attachment. even when attachment feels familiar and difficult to release. For a long time, you may have believed that leaving requires conflict, that you must explain your reasons in a way that satisfies everyone involved. But some truths do not need to be argued into acceptance. Some decisions are not meant to be negotiated. Walking away can be quiet, it can be steady, it can happen without a final confrontation or a perfect closing statement. It can simply be a shift in where you place your energy, your presence, your attention. There is often guilt that follows this kind of distance. A voice that questions whether you are being too harsh, too distant, too unwilling to fix what once mattered to you. But what that voice does not always acknowledge is how much you have already given, how long you have already tried, how often you have already bent in order to keep something from breaking. Distance is not the absence of care, it is the presence of truth. It is what remains when you can no longer pretend that something is working when it is not. As you begin to create space, something unexpected happens. The noise that once surrounded you starts to quiet down. The constant pull to respond, to react, to engage begins to fade. And in that silence, you start to hear yourself again. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotions feel less tangled. You begin to remember what it feels like to exist without being in a constant state of adjustment. That clarity is not something you find by holding on. It is something you discover by letting go. Walking away does not always mean you stop caring. Sometimes it means you care enough about yourself to no longer stay where you are diminished. It means you understand that love, in its healthiest form, does not require you to lose yourself in order to keep it. And when that understanding takes root, your decisions begin to reflect it, not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of a deep and steady respect for your own well-being. There is a quiet strength in choosing distance without needing to announce it, in allowing your actions to reflect what your words no longer need to explain, in stepping back without turning it into a battle. This kind of strength does not seek validation, and it does not demand agreement. It simply moves, guided by a clarity that has taken time to form and refuses to be ignored any longer. And in that movement, something shifts. The hold that once kept you in place begins to loosen, not because anything outside of you has changed, but because something within you has. You are no longer standing in confusion, waiting for things to make sense. You are moving with understanding, even if others do not see it the same way. And that is what makes distance powerful. It is not an escape, it is a decision to choose peace over familiarity, truth over comfort, and self-respect over silent endurance. The same patterns that once worked, the subtle pressure, the carefully placed words, the expectations that went unspoken yet understood, no longer find the same response. Where there was once hesitation, there is now pause. Where there was once compliance, there is now consideration. And in that space, their power begins to fade, not through resistance, but through absence. Self-respect is not loud. It does not need to prove itself or demand recognition. It is felt in the decisions you make when no one is watching, in the boundaries you hold, even when they are inconvenient, in the way you no longer rush to fix what was never yours to carry. It is a quiet commitment to yourself, one that reshapes your actions without needing to announce them. And over time, that commitment becomes unshakable. You may still feel the pull of old habits, the urge to explain, to justify, to return to what feels familiar. But each time you choose differently, each time you stand in your own truth without bending it to fit someone else's expectations, you strengthen something within you that cannot be easily undone. It is not about perfection. It is about consistency, about showing up for yourself in small, steady ways until it becomes your natural way of being. And as this becomes part of you, something remarkable happens. The things that once controlled your decisions lose their weight. The opinions that once unsettled you lose their urgency. The approval you once sought begins to matter less, not because you have become indifferent, but because you have become anchored. You no longer look outward to define what you already know within. This is where power shifts in its truest form, not in changing others, not in proving a point, but in reclaiming your own direction. You begin to understand that no one can manipulate what they cannot access. And when you are rooted in self-respect, that access is no longer freely given. It is chosen intentionally and carefully in alignment with who you have become. In the end, choosing yourself is not a single decision. It is a practice, one that unfolds over time, shaped by awareness, strengthened by action, and protected by truth. And once you fully step into it, there is nothing left for control to attach itself to. The invisible chains that once held you in place do not need to be broken forcefully. They simply fall away because you are no longer standing where they were placed.